Welcome to the Bookshop at the End of the Internet. This podcast is dedicated to helping book lovers discover new authors. Like all the best bookshops, this podcast is filled with all kinds of books and all kinds of authors. So tune in, browse around, find a new author, and discover a new favorite book at the Bookshop at the End of the Internet. I'm Stacey Horan, author, book lover, and host of the Bookshop at the End of the Internet. This is episode number 190. For more information about this or any of our episodes, go to my website, staceyhoran.com. If you enjoy the podcast, leave us a review, like us on social media, and share us with your friends, family, and fellow readers. In today's episode of The Bookshop at the End of the Internet, I'm chatting with author Reenita Hora about her book, Operation Mom, My Plan to Get My Mom a Life and a Man. This young adult rom-com novel features a 17-year-old native of Mumbai and her mother, a middle-aged Punjabi woman. Reenita is quick to point out that this book is a work of fiction, not a self-help guide, and is more comedy than romance. In fact, it is inspired by the comedy of her everyday existence and the zany, feisty, and fabulous women in her life. Her goal with Operation Mom was to write a comedic story that would be universal, while still showcasing Indian characters and aspects of their lives that most audiences have not seen before, especially the everyday humor. Reenita is also the producer of two podcasts. One is a narrative fiction radio drama of her magical coming-of-age novel, Shadow Realm, and the other is the True Fiction Project, which explores the journey from unscripted to scripted, wherein a nonfiction interview is used as the basis for a work of fiction. In this episode, I'll chat with Reenita about her writing journey, her books, both fiction and nonfiction, and her desire to write stories that reflect the South Asian experience, as well as a few other things. Coming up. Reenita Hora, I want to thank you very much for joining me today on the podcast.
Stacey, thank you so much for having me on the podcast today. I am thrilled to be here with you and chat with you. So exciting.
I thought what we could do today is start by talking about your new book, Operation Mom, My Plan to Get My Mom a Life and a Man. Now, if you don't mind, tell us a little bit about this book and what inspired you to write it.
Absolutely. Oh my goodness. Okay, so this is a young adult rom-com, which one reviewer described as a little bit more com than rom. And I absolutely love that description. So I'm going with it. It's a fiction novel. It is, even though, some people have wondered whether this was sort of a self-help book, and that's led to a whole, other idea. But no, it isn't. It is a fiction novel. And it's actually a book that I wrote several years ago, inspired by sort of the comedy that is my everyday existence, if you will. I have had this life where I have had many, many really zany female characters, my mother, my daughter, my friends. I mean, just kind of everyone who sort of crosses my life and household. And certainly within the female genetics, there is this very strong, feisty, lovable, crazy woman that seems to exist. Her DNA seems to infiltrate different generations of my family. And that's really what inspired me. It was the inspiration for sort of taking elements, from those instances and creating fiction out of it, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Well, what was the spark for this book? What is that thing that got you started writing it?
Oh my gosh, it was so long ago now. It's hard to actually describe the exact spark. I think at some point I began to collect and gather these crazy conversations that would take place. Again, they would center around sort of this theme of this feisty woman in my life. And when I say this theme, that's the theme, but this woman is what? Some combination of me, my daughter, my mother, my grandmother, my friends, but there seemed to be this sort of the central female presence, the manifesting in different ways in these different relationships and these different scenarios. So I began to write these down simply as conversations, fictionalized, with the idea of putting together a screenplay, of writing a screenplay. And then as I began to synthesize the story, and it became clear that it was this mom-daughter story, I began writing it as a screenplay. At the time, my agent just stopped me and said, absolutely no, you've got to write this as a book first. And, what can I say? I listened to instructions. Sort of one thing led to the other, and, we got to a book. The book was initially published in India for the Indian market only. It was called, the subtitle was a little bit different at the time. It was Operation Mom, How I Got My Mother a Life and a Man. And then the manuscript was subsequently updated and shopped to publishers here in the US. And the version that we talk about today, which, the recently published version, is actually called Operation Mom, My Plan to Get My Mom a Life and a Man. So it's the same story, but it's just a little bit of a different take on it.
Let's talk about your main characters in this book. Introduce them to us, if you don't mind.
Certainly. I would say the main character, the protagonist, is Ila. She is a 17-year-old native of Mumbai. Mumbai is the city in which I was born and where I grew up, where I spent my own young adult years, and so have very close bonds and connections to the city, the fabric of the city, the people, its culture, so forth. So we have Ila, she is the protagonist, and then there is her mom, Veena, who is a middle-aged Punjabi woman. They are both Punjabi, of course. The Punjabi community, although ethnically from northern India, from the state of Punjab, you find Punjabis in certainly several parts of India, several parts of the world, and certainly in Mumbai. And there is a distinct difference, I would say, to the Mumbai-based Punjabi versus the kind of Punjabi that you would find still living in Punjab. Because, we develop these Mumbai bad habits, if you will. It's think you may be from anywhere in the world, but you've ended up in New York City, and then you identify as a New Yorker before, something else. Similar to that, perhaps. So you've got Ila and you've got Veena. And I stick to this old adage in a way that goes something like, you can take the girl out of Punjab, but you can't take Punjab out of the girl. And we certainly see this in Veena, who is somewhat confused, torn, you could say conflicted with her Punjabi heritage. On one hand, she knows it, loves it, identifies with it. And on the other hand, there are all these things about it that she just can't stand and wants to run away from, and really finds herself identifying with her Mumbai persona so much more because it's a welcome relief from the Punjabi aspect of herself. Ila, her daughter, who is the main protagonist of the book, is much more of a Mumbai girl. Yes, she's Punjabi, and you certainly can't get away from all of that, but she identifies much more as your typical Mumbai teenager. So those are the main characters. The others are the support characters. Both mom and daughter have their floozy best friends, their floozy BFFs. Mom's floozy BFF is Auntie Malika, who she has known from childhood and has embarked on some crazy adventures with when they were teens themselves. And of course, there is Dipali, who is Ila's floozy BFF. And it's interesting to see how one mirrors the other, because when you look at mom and daughter, although, they will tussle and they will argue with each other, and Ela will say, oh my gosh, mom, I need to get her off my back. I've had enough of her. These are two women, two generations, you can say, of the same woman cut from the same piece of cloth. So mom and daughter. And isn't that sort of a universal theme?
Yes. And certainly ripe for a book and a screenplay.
Yes.
What did your daughter, your mom, your family members and friends think of the book when they read it, assuming they read it? Did they see themselves in it? Did things feel familiar? Did they come to you and say, hey, I think that was my conversation that you put in there?
Yes. So the other joke, which is, I think, no longer a joke, that goes around in my household and sort of with my extended community, is you better watch what you say or do in front of Reenita, because, if she doesn't like it, or even if she does, or if she likes it too much, she's just going to put you in her next book, and that's it. And that definitely has happened with my fiction. It certainly happened with this. But what's interesting is that people who know me, I should say, will identify with scenes, situations, conversations, certainly the settings and the kind of language. They can't pinpoint necessarily which character is based on who, or that particular dialogue, or that particular conversation, or that particular scene. It's so familiar. It happened, I know, but where, when, who, what? And that, I think, is the beauty of fiction, because you take a little bit of a snippet from real life and you can completely twist it, if you will, into whatever you like, because that's what gives you license as a writer of fiction to create the story.
Yeah. Well, I want to talk about something that you wrote in your bio when we were exchanging information before recording this. And I'm going to paraphrase just a bit here, but I'd like to talk about a sentence that you wrote, and it's passionate about storytelling the Indian narrative. You write characters and themes that reflect the South Asia experience, whether set in South Asia or in the Western world. Can we delve into that a bit? What do you mean by the South Asian experience? And do you find it differs whether you're setting your stories in South Asia or you're setting them in the West?
Thank you for asking that question, Stacey. I think it is a very important question to ask, and certainly one that deserves a thoughtful answer, because yes, the South Asian experience does change, it does differ. And this is not something that the Western world, or I should say the world outside of India or South Asia, is necessarily familiar with, because they audiences tend to lump it all together. Why wouldn't they, right? So, for example, I grew up in Mumbai, and this book is very much a Mumbai story. That's where it's set. And because it's comedy, and comedy is about dialogue and timing and situation, the comedy is very Mumbai centric, right? So why I say this is because when I wrote the screenplay, I did something a little bit different. So I wrote a screenplay based upon Operation Mom, which is being shopped right now to producers in the hope of sort of making it a film. But I decided to do something a little bit different. I essentially took the same story, but I set it in the US. So it's based in Hoboken, New Jersey. And you've got the same characters, Veena, Ela, mom, daughter. But obviously, it's a little bit different now, because mom is an immigrant and her daughter, Ela, is a first-generation American. So obviously, the context is going to be different. Ela is not the same Ela growing up in Mumbai with the Mumbai context, right? Ela is now in Hoboken with American friends. Her floozy best friend is no longer Dipali. her floozy best friend, is Leslie, and mom's is Julie. So although the characters are the same, they are different. I know that sounds like an oxymoron, but they're American characters. JJ, dad is the same, but the context changes. So the jokes are going to change. The kind of comedy is going to change. The dialogue obviously has to change, even though the intention might be the same or similar. And it's important also to understand that the experience of the Indian American is quite different to the experience of the Indian in India. So does the South Asian experience change? Absolutely. If the story was set in the UK, which has a very large Indian community, the context would still be different. There is an anecdote in the book and also in the screenplay about the fact that mom used to stalk George Michael when she was a kid. That story or sub-story is almost cut and paste from my own life, because I was desperately in love with George Michael when I was a kid. And I did sort of chase him and track him down in London when I was a teenager. So, but that was, England, and the English audience, if they read that, they can identify in a way that is quite different to, again, the South Asian American, just again because of context. So when I was writing the screenplay, the feedback I was getting from critique groups and audiences is like, well, why George Michael? Like, what's the relevance there? And, why not sort of an American character? And, things like that. So Ali Zafar, who Ela has a crush on, is a Pakistani pop idol. But in the screenplay version, she has a crush on Bad Bunny. So context changes. And again, I wanted to write a book that would be universal, that would be open to audiences everywhere, and that would really get away from the stereotypes. We have lots and lots of different stereotypes, Indian stereotypes that exist. And some of them, of course, are ripe for comedy. But the other things I feel have been overplayed over and over again. I won't, go into them because there would be such a long laundry list of stereotypes. And secondly, perhaps it would be unfair to sort of list all of the different stereotypes that, some people perhaps might enjoy. But I wanted to write a story that was the kind of comedy that wasn't focused on weddings, wasn't focused on parents obsessing about grades and, things like that people know about. So I wanted to write a story sort of that looked upon these Indian characters and showcased, I should say, these Indian characters in a way that other people had not seen before, to see what happens in their household, to examine their relationships, to see their dysfunction, and to see the comedic situations that arise out of them, and also think about how these are universal themes for mothers and daughters anywhere in the world. I wanted a mother or a daughter in Brazil to be able to pick this up and say, oh my gosh, that sounds like me. These characters might be in Mumbai, but that's like me and my daughter, or that's like me and my mom, etc. Does that help? It's a very long-winded answer.
And so when you were coming up with the story, did you have in mind, before you set out writing, the certain themes that you wanted to touch upon, the things that you wanted to make sure you showed in your characters and your settings in the dialogue? Or did you find the themes developing as you wrote? Did they sort of come after the fact?
Yeah, I would say it's the latter. I do have a tendency to outline a lot of my books before I actually sit down to write them, or outline them as best as I can. It always changes. So, I'm more of a plotter than a pantser. But with this particular one, I would say this one was the least outlined of all. And because I wanted the themes to evolve, I knew that, everybody loves Indian weddings. And then there's all this Indian, if you turn on Netflix or Amazon TV, it's like all of the Indian drama that works is about blood and murder and drama. Didn't want any of that. We've got great comedy in our everyday lives and situations as Indians, whether we're in India, whether we're in another part of the world. And it's not just a lost in translation kind of comedic situation, right? But it's regular comedy, like, and what comes to mind is Friends and Curb Your Enthusiasm and Larry David, sort of the silly situations of everyday life. And I really wanted to showcase that and those kinds of themes which people don't readily identify India or Indians with. I wanted to get away from this constant spectacular notion of India and the Indian weddings and the colors and the palaces and or the gore and the blood and the drama. There's a lot of that that's been done. So we do have regular lives which are dysfunctional, and dysfunctional in a good sense, meaning the comedy comes from there. And that's what I really wanted to focus on.
I'd also like to talk about some of your other projects. In particular, you're also a podcaster. So I was wondering, can we spend a little time on one of your podcasts in particular, your Shadow Realm podcast? Tell us a bit about this project.
Yes, this is a very exciting project, very close to my heart. Shadow Realm was actually the first fiction book that I wrote. I actually wrote this as a middle grade novel called When Arya Fell Through the Fault, and before I wrote Operation Mom, just shortly before. Having said that, that was published in India, the book, and I have the manuscript has changed vastly since then. It is now a young adult story, and I have a couple of publishers here that I'm considering publishing it with in the West. But what I decided to do a couple of years ago was something different. I have a long time background as a journalist, and the idea of a radio drama, I'm talking about before the days of podcasting, had always been something on my mind. And sort of with my transition from radio to podcasting, I thought, what I want to do is actually create a narrative fiction podcast version of Shadow Realm. And that's exactly what I did. I knew that I wanted it to be a musical because my happy place is musical theater. It has been from the time I was a child. And the story is about a San Francisco teen who is angry and rebellious and rejects anything to do with his identity and his ethnicity. And in the wake of an accident he causes, confining his mother to a coma, he seizes up the Ramayana mythology. These are the mythological stories on which he was raised. And he attempts to read the healing verses to his mom in order to heal her and wake her up out of this coma. But he finds himself portaled into the land of its stories. So into the land of the mythology, where he must come face to face with Ravan, the 10-headed demon, and learn how to vanquish this demon in order to conquer the demons in his own ordinary world and save his mother as a result. So no spoilers, but that's essentially a short summary of the logline, if you will, of the story. And I found Kanix, who is this amazing composer in the Midwest, who created a soundtrack using ancient Sanskrit chants and modern instruments. He created the soundtrack, this entire score, and then we used that to actually create the podcast. We cast characters. All of the characters are played by different voice actors, and the sound editing is this real masterful piece of art, where you actually hear the demons and the battles with the demons and the sounds of the forest and the sounds of the wild woods when he's portaled into, the land of the Ramayana mythology. interspersed with this beautiful music created by Kanekeshwaran. So that's Shadow Realm. It was actually released as a podcast in late 2021. No, in late 2020. Season 2 comes out in September. So that's very, very soon, very exciting. And it takes the story to a whole different level. Season 2 is actually part 1 of book 2 of the series.
Excellent. And correct me if I'm wrong, but this is Shadow Realm isn't your only podcast. You do host another podcast, right? The True Fiction Project.
Exactly. Shadow Realm is a YA fantasy fiction podcast, narrative fiction. The True Fiction Project is a little bit different. Firstly, it sounds like an oxymoron, and that is intentional. The idea is that it really combines nonfiction and fiction and explores the journey from unscripted to scripted. So what I do here is I identify people with great stories. So here's Stacy. She has an amazing story, and I will conduct an interview very much like this, in which we will really focus in on that story. Then I take that audio interview and assign it to one of our many talented writers who listen to it, pick up something from it, and create a fiction piece based upon what they picked up from that interview. And we audioify that and then piece together the Q&A portion plus the audio fiction so that you can see the whole journey, as I said, from nonfiction to fiction and from unscripted to scripted. So that is the True Fiction Project.
Fascinating. And in the midst of all of this, because it sounds like you're actually rather busy, you have other works in progress as well. Can you give us a little insight into some of those?
Yes, I do have other works in progress. I never stop writing for a second, because if I do, I don't know what will become of me or my stories. That's my insecurity. So I have 3 books in the works already. Those are Playtime at the Bog, which is a historical fiction love story, which is due out sometime next year. Also, Ace of Blades, which is a literary nonfiction memoir. It's the story of my father, who hand-built one of the most important consumer products manufacturing companies in India. And I will say it is like the Indian version of Succession. My father was this genius, crazy, bipolar man, and you put that in the context of India, the Indian family business, the horrible misogyny that is so ripe and rampant, or was certainly in my extended family situation, and you get this amazing story. So that's Ace of Blades. I have a children's picture book that I have co-written with a friend of mine. It's called Festival of Light. And like I said, it's a picture book, so quite different again. And it focuses on Hanukkah and Diwali, the 2 festivals of light. That will also be out sometime. All of these will be out sometime next year. So that's as far as the books go. In the meantime, I have screenplays for Operation Mom, as well as for Shadow Realm, which have both gone on to win a whole series of awards, as has the book, Operation Mom. So I'm shopping the screenplays and continuing to develop the Shadow Realm series as well. And I have Chapter by Episode, which is my digital publishing platform, which it's a storytelling platform. It's an app. And it publishes chat fiction books on the app. It's called Chapter by Episode.
And what got you started with that project?
So there are 2 things. One is I wanted to create sort of a digital publishing platform for diversity-oriented stories that were genre fiction stories, so mystery, thriller, romance, etc., but really focusing on diverse characters, theme settings. So that's what you absolutely see there. The other thing is the structure of the stories, which is about chat fiction. So it's not long form like you would read in a book, but it's what we call chat fiction, which looks like a text conversation that you would have on your phone between you and your friend. So character A, character B, character A, character B. With the research we did, we found out that the Gen Z population and the millennial population really engages with their phones, consumes content and stories on their phones, and actually likes the structure. So we've developed this particular structure. We call them chat books, and this is chat fiction. So the combination of the chat fiction and the diverse digital storytelling platform is sort of what led me to creating this as a platform for authors to publish their stories in this particular structure.
Wonderful. All right. So chapter by episode, people can download the app.
That's correct. And it's available on the App Store, the Apple App Store, as well as on the Google Play Android store as well.
So you have a few things happening.
Yes.
You're more than busy. I don't know what the next level of that is, but it sounds like you're even more than busy.
Yes, it just keeps evolving.
Yeah. Yeah, which is great. If people want to follow you and find out what's happening when and where and next seasons and next books and next installments, where can they go to find you and that information?
The best way to do it, Stacey, would be to go to my website, which is www.reenita.com. My name, REENITA.com, and sign up for my newsletter, which is on the very first page. The website, firstly, I should say, will link to everything, all of my social media. Like I said, it has sign up for my newsletter. It will describe both of my podcasts. It has a separate section for my screenplays, talks about all of my books, where to find them. I mean, all of the books I've previously published as well. I've written and published 7 books, many of them nonfiction before I even got to my fiction. So the website has all of that information, links to all of it, and will lead you to all of it. But in terms of news coming out in the future, that happens through my socials and my newsletter program. I am very connected with my reading community. I share bonus material. I share everything that's happening in my life, the awards that the books have received, the upcoming work, releases, so forth. So I'd love to have audiences log in, join my newsletter program, become part of the community, and interact with me there.
Excellent. And as you mentioned, the website has links, I assume, for the podcast, the different platforms where people can listen to it, and also different places where they can buy Operation Mom or any of the other books.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So both of the podcasts and their episodes can be listened to on my website itself. However, it will also lead them to the other places where you can listen to it. All of your usual suspects, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Ghana, any of the other ones. And certainly Operation Mom and all of the places that you can buy it at online certainly seems to be the easiest way for most people. So whether that's Amazon, Barnes and Nobles, your independent bookstores, it's all there.
Wonderful. Wonderful. Well, Reenita, I want to thank you very much for joining me today on the podcast. And I want to wish you luck with Operation Mom, your podcasts, your screenplays, your works in progress, everything that you have going on. Congratulations on everything you've accomplished, and best of luck with the rest of your writing journey.
Stacey, thank you so much. It has been such a pleasure to speak with you, and I look forward to doing so again in the future, maybe with another book.
Well, let's hope.
Thank you.
The Bookshop at the End of the Internet is a podcast dedicated to helping book lovers discover new authors. Like any good bookshop, this podcast features a wide variety of books by the equally varied and interesting authors who felt compelled to write them. This podcast gives you a chance to meet these wonderful writers and discover your next must-read book. Listen to the authors describe their books and tell you their stories in their own words. My interviews feature books from all genres and authors from all walks of life, including those who are indie published as well as those published by small presses and large publishing houses. Looking for unique, not so easy to find books for yourself, a friend, or a book club? Tune into this podcast and find your newest favorite author or maybe a soon-to-be bestseller. This podcast, like all the best bookshops, is filled with all kinds of books and all kinds of authors. Tune in, browse around, find a new author, and discover a new favorite book. You never know what treasures you might find in the bookshop at the end of the internet.